recap this series, and then we're moving on next week. Week 1, we talked about Scripture, why we can trust it, why we can believe it, why it's the most historically proven literature in history. Week 2, we talked about God's existence, why we can believe that God does exist, and we used rational arguments. Week 3, we talked about understanding good and evil. Week 4, we talked about different faiths and their beliefs. Week 5, what Jesus said about himself and the claims he made. Week 6, what others said about Jesus, both those in the Scriptures and those outside of the Scriptures. And then last week, we talked about why we can believe Jesus is who he said he was. And we talked specifically about the death and resurrection of Jesus, because that is the cornerstone of our faith, and why we can believe it. All right. I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to have to bear with me today, because I am exhausted. In my prayer, when I talked about parents who are exhausted, I am one of them. All right. First question that came in, we just had 3 that I'm going to cover today. And again, if you have other ones, you can always write them down, and I'll cover them during the week. The first question that I'm going to cover today is, where do I go the moment I die as a Christian? So where do I go the moment I die as a Christian? Simple answer, you go to heaven to be with Jesus the moment you die. Simple. Here's why we believe this. Luke 23, I'm going to tell you this also, in case you didn't pick up. This week was very busy. There's nothing else up there. That's it. Rest of the day. Okay? That's all it's going to be. So if you want to grab a piece of paper or you want to take notes on your phone, you can do that. But your pastor was a very busy man this week, so that's what you get. You can deal with it. That's right. You clap it for me, because I deserve it. No. Luke 23:43. Jesus is speaking to the thief on the cross. So Jesus is being crucified, and he says to the thief these words, "Today you will be with me in paradise." This is what Jesus says on the cross to another man who's dying that very day with him. And he says, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Not someday soon you will be with me. Not from at a later point. He says, no, today you will be with me. So this is one of the reasons why we can believe that the moment we die, we will go to be with Jesus. Another reason, in 2 Corinthians 5:8, Paul says, when writing to the Corinthian church, "We are confident, I say, and would prefer to be away from the body and at home with the Lord." Another way that this has been said, I believe it's the KJV, says this: to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. That's what the Scriptures teach. So what that means is, when I die and this body dies, which this body will die at some point, we will be present with Jesus in heaven. Okay. Paul, simple statement that he makes here, but it's a very powerful one, and it's one, again, that's just reiterated, because we use Scripture to interpret Scripture. So when you take Jesus and you take Paul, and then Paul once again, Paul in Philippians chapter 1, verse 23, Paul is in prison. Paul knows that he's going to die at some point because of his faith. And Paul says, "I am hard-pressed between the two." And he's talking about wanting to stay on earth and be a minister of the gospel, or 2, to be with Jesus and die. So Paul's like, listen, I'm hard-pressed because I want to continue ministering. I want as many people as possible to come to know Jesus, but also I just want to go be with him, because, I'm going to be real. If I were Paul, at a certain point, I'm just going to be done too. Right? That's just what it is. So we got Jesus saying it, Paul saying it, and then Jesus again, Matthew 22, Jesus is talking about how God is the God of the living, not the dead. And so, a lot of people will try to talk about this middle state, which there is a middle state, and I'm going to talk about that here in a second. This middle state where it's not like you're in heaven, but you're just kind of waiting. Okay, I'm not going to go into other theologies today. For those of you who wished I would, I'm not going to, because I've got a lot to talk about. But we, the moment we die, as followers of Jesus, go to be with Jesus. All right. Now, this is not the time that you will be judged. This is not the time that you will receive your eternal rewards based on what you did with your life. This is not the time you will receive your resurrected body. That will come once Jesus comes back to the earth. Okay, Jesus comes back, tribulation's over, millennial reign, whatever, we all get judged to go from there. Okay? This middle time period, though, we are in heaven. And that's why when you get into Revelation, towards the end of Revelation, you read about new heavens, new earth, new Jerusalem. Why? Because there is a new heavens, new earth, new Jerusalem. But the moment we die, we go to heaven to be with Jesus while waiting for the new kingdom to be established. Does this all make sense? Yep. Okay. All right. So that is answer to question number 1, where you go when you die, when you are a Christian. Oh, by the way, to be a Christian, just in case that's a question that's questioned, to be a Christian, you have to just follow Jesus. So you say, Jesus, I give you my life. I'm going to walk in your truth. I'm going to walk in your plan. Holy Spirit, be with me every day as I make decisions. That's it, okay? That sounds like that's the simpler form of it, right? Because you have to be discipled. You have to learn and grow. You can't stay stagnant as a Christian. You continue to be growing. But that's the simplicity of it. Okay, number 2. I'm gonna write this one down and then I'll erase it because it's just. Also, by the way, there's no mocking your pastor. I'll blame it on the lack of sleep, but this is my true handwriting. Dude, you need to be quiet. Go back to school. Okay, I did the wrong way there. Okay. Opposite. All right. So somebody wrote down, their question was Hebrews, Israel. This was what was written on the paper, and this person gave it away. But you don't know who it is. So I'm going to make fun of them. They wrote Hebrews versus Israelites versus Jews versus Messianic Jews. That's what they wrote. So I'm going to take this as a question about war. Who would win? And so I'm going to go into that theory now. Great job, guys. That's not the actual question. I'm going to explain what they are. So, Hebrews. Hebrews are the people who spoke Hebrew. Simple enough, right? As in the English are the people who spoke English until America came along and butchered language in their own way. And so now there's more people who speak English. But if you're English, you speak English from England. Make sense? Is that correct, Chris? Thank you very much. For those of you who don't know Chris, she is English, correct? No? Yeah, okay, thank you. You're scaring me. I shouldn't put myself on the spot this morning. So that's Hebrew. So then Israelite. So Israelites are people who are the descendants of Israel. So this is about to get really bad, but I don't care. So you're going to deal with it. This is in honor of my daughter who likes the color pink. So you got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, okay? Abraham is the father of the faith for Judaism, okay? Abraham has a son named Isaac. He also has another son, and that doesn't go too well for him because he didn't accept the promise that God had spoken to him. He has sex with his wife's servant, essentially, is what we're going to say to make it easier for you, and has another child, and then they become a big problem. But Abraham, Isaac, is going to be the one through which the promise given to Abraham will follow. Isaac has Jacob, who also has a brother, but Jacob is the one through whom it will follow. And then Jacob ends up having 12 sons. That's terrible. Guys, I need a better Vanna. So stop it. Stop. So he has 12 sons, okay? Now Jacob at one point wrestles with God, and God actually changes his name to Israel. Okay, so Abraham, father of faith. Abraham has Isaac. Isaac has Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons, but before he has his 12 sons, okay, he actually changes his name to Israel because he will be the father of many nations. Okay, so then the descendants of Jacob become known as Israelites. Does this make sense? Okay, so far we've covered Hebrews, we've covered Israelites. Now we're going to get to Jews. And so this is where you have to know a little bit of history. And I'm not actually going to write this. Well, I will write this because I love writing. You know, you just get fun, Jonathan, today. So, nation of Israel is made up of these tribes. Now, I'm not going to get too intricate today. But what actually ends up happening is in the allotment of lands, Joseph does not get an allotment of land, even though he's a son of Jacob, because he is a leader in Egypt after all of his mess with his life. You can read about that somewhere else in Genesis, which is a great story. But Joseph has two sons, And those two sons get an allotment of land. And then the tribe of Levi, which is one of the 12 sons, does not get an allotment of land because they are designated as priests. And so they don't have an allotment of land. They have an allotment of the inheritance based on the tithe and other things. Okay. But over time, what takes place is they don't all get along. Anybody ever have siblings? Yeah. You don't get along over time, right? So actually, the nation of Israel gets divided up. So you have a northern kingdom. That's why I put it up top. You have a northern kingdom, and this was known as Israel. And then you have a southern kingdom, and this was known as Judah. Okay? Now, the northern kingdom actually has a lot of problems. They end up getting ransacked. They end up getting sieged. It's just not good. Okay? So they end up getting dispersed. They're going all over the place. Meanwhile, Judah is actually being obedient to God, following God, and they're thriving, and they do okay. So in the dispersion of the northern kingdom, where the people are all over the place due to being in exile and becoming servants of other people, the nation of Judah ends up becoming the prominent tribe within the nation of Israel as a whole. Does this make sense so far? Yeah. Okay. Now, Judah, I'm not going to do this, but in the Hebrew, it's pronounced a different way, and so we're not going to get into that. But what they end up doing is they take that name and they shorten it down, so it actually works in our English language as well. You take Judah, you abbreviate it to Jew, there. So then what happens is the people from the tribe of Judah were known as Jews, but the issue is these people became dispersed, and over time, the name that became accepted for all of them was the term Jew. Does this make sense? Yes. Yeah. It doesn't, but that's what happened. Okay. So then we get to Messianic Jews. I'm going to erase this while I explain Messianic Jew. So Messianic Jew would be a group of people. So, okay. So up to this point, by the way, this right here and these two are primarily used a lot, obviously, older, because the closer you get to Israel himself, you're more likely to use that term Israelite, okay? And Hebrews, obviously, is a language that was used a lot more often back then, and so that was a term that was used, which is why today you see this being used. So then, okay, good. I cleaned this earlier, and I literally had to put so much elbow grease into it, and I did not want to have that happen again. All right, so then Messianic Jews would be a group or a sect of those who are ethnically Jewish, which, by the way, yes, it is an ethnicity. It's not just a faith, though it is both. And so a Messianic Jew is a person who would believe that Jesus is and was the Messiah. So a Messianic Jew is somebody who is of the Jewish faith, who believed that Jesus was the Messiah that was promised for the Jewish people, who did come, who did die and rise again on the third day, and that he is the Savior of the world. That's what Messianic Jews believe. Now, Messianic Jews will still continue to uphold parts of their Jewish faith that don't obviously contradict the fulfillment that Jesus brings. So there will be Messianic Jews who will celebrate Jewish holidays. There will be Messianic Jews who subscribe completely to Mosaic law, which, I mean, we as Christians do that as well, by the way, in case you didn't know that. And so that is what a Messianic Jew is. Does this make sense? Okay. All right. Now, the reason why I asked does it make sense is because sometimes I talk over people's heads. I've put a lot of work into this. Also, I hear very well. Here we go. I look at Jane. I don't know. I love looking right. Jane's fun to look at. I don't know. Okay, so then the last question is actually the most in-depth question. It's the question I'm most scared to talk about, not because I don't believe it, but I'm most scared because there's a lot to it. Okay, so somebody wrote down creation versus evolution. And before I even talk about this, I'm going to say some things. Number one, getting into a debate over this kind of topic. How do I say this? You ever been in an argument with somebody and like you picked up on the fact that they knew they were wrong, but they still would not change their opinion? Have you ever been that person? Okay. Now, this is the kind of topic that can very much be, right? I mean, if you ever get into a debate like this, this is where this can become a major problem because people are not actually willing to ever give any way. Okay. So this is where, at the beginning of this series, I talked about this, about a very important fact about this entire series. I have not used these last 2 months to fuel your knowledge, to go out and be like, you're an idiot, you're wrong. This is why you're wrong. That is not the purpose of this series. The purpose of this series was to encourage you in your faith so that if there were ever anybody to ask a question, you would be more readily prepared to discuss it. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, here's the other thing. I do not have a PhD in biology. I don't have a master's in biology. I have a youth ministry degree from Valley Forge Christian College, which is now the University of Valley Forge. I had a very small class on ecology, but even that was not great. So over the last few weeks, I've been preparing for this topic, and I've read a lot, and I watched one specific video, which is on Right Now Media, which I'm going to plug here. Which, by the way, as a person who is just connected with our church in any way, you have access to Right Now Media. So if you go to Pursuit Corner over there, pick up the half slip of paper that says Right Now Media. You can create your own profile for free based on what's written on there, and that is yours for free to watch anytime. Nobody can see what you watch. You just watch it for your own sake. Does that make sense? Yep. All right, that's great. Okay, so this is what I was going to plug. There was one specific one that I watched on Right Now Media that I found very beneficial. There was like 15 PhD scientists in this video, and so I had to watch it multiple times because I couldn't quite understand what they were saying. But it's actually called Evolution's Achilles Heel. And so that would be a video that I encourage you to dive into. Okay, let's talk about this. Bob, if I make any severe statements, you just keep your mouth shut in the back. And Bob, you did teach biology, right? Yeah, Bob taught biology. So even pre-service, I'm talking with Bob, and we're not debating. It was actually helpful for me because we were clarifying. Okay. One of the things that I have to first throw out and we have to first understand is the fact that we sometimes, what am I doing? That's wrong. We all too often combine two things, okay? So what you've been taught pretty consistently, or I should say what is being taught and what people don't realize they're absorbing, is that evolution and natural selection are the same thing. But the problem is that they're not. They're not the same thing. As a creationist, I believe in natural selection. Okay? I believe in it. I don't believe in evolution. And I'm going to go a little bit into that today. All right. And by a little bit, I mean a lot of it, and I might get overwhelmed. Please come back next week. I promise to preach on something I'm actually qualified to talk about. But this is the best I got. Okay. So in Darwinian evolution, one of the things that is discussed and becomes an issue is that I'll write it down this way. I'll use a different color. So in Darwinian evolution, specifically, there's the belief that there can be a changing of kinds within specific creatures. Okay, so what that means is like one single cell can develop into groups of cells, which can develop into a living being, which can develop into, I'll just do it this way, Darwinian's tree of life, okay? So Darwinian's tree of life, everything comes off of this, single cell, you got dog, cat, whatever. So there's a changing of kinds within Darwinian evolution. Okay, so this is what they believe here. And so, but the problem with this is that there's actually zero proof of this anywhere. I'm going to say that one more time. There is zero proof of a changing of kinds. Okay? Now, there is for sure proof of natural selection which is changing of creatures. Okay? Now, I'm going to say this right now too. I might not use terms that you're comfortable with or understand, or you may know more about this than I do, and so I might say kind or creature or species, and you go, what you're actually trying to say is this, but just bear with me. I might not use the right language, but I can assure you, if you stay with me, hopefully you'll pick up what I'm saying here. Okay, so this is going to be fun. Okay, so natural selection, I'm going to do this. So we'll call this a DNA strand here, okay? Which DNA, by the way, it's a coil and it's wrapped and there's a whole bunch of stuff to it. Now, DNA coils, there's a lot to them. I'm not going to explain it all the way. There's actually really only four basic, I'll call them letters. There's basically only four things that make up the entire strand of DNA. And so DNA, by the way, I took some other notes even this morning because I'm never satisfied with what I know. So DNA, if you were to take one strand of DNA and span it out, so take one strand of DNA that's coiled up and wrapped up and span it out, it would span 6 feet long. So in one cell of your body, one DNA strand spread out would be 6 feet long. If you took all the DNA of your body and its makeup from every individual cell and you stretch them end to end and line them all the way up, the length of it would be 67 billion miles long. So that's how much information is in your body right now. Right now you have 67 billion miles worth of information in your body. Yeah. So you got that. There are 3.2 billion base pairs of genetic lettering within the human genome. Again, 3.2 billion genetic letters, base pairs within the human genome. So, yes, making this, okay, good. Back to my message. So when we're talking about DNA, we're just talking about a ton of information. So in natural selection, what we're going to talk about specifically is, I'll just pick one thing, okay? So in natural selection, what we'll say is, if this specific gene shows to thrive in an environment, right, and reproduces, and when I say reproduces, I mean the creature itself reproduces based on that specific gene, then what will take place is you get that, and that gene obviously will stay there, and you'll have it, and it'll be right there again, okay? Now let's say in a specific environment that this gene is not as useful, and so what ends up taking place is you have a change in DNA. And it's not a change as much as it's a selection of what's already there and understanding of this. Okay, now this might get over your heads, and this is where I'm going to change some things at. So, in Darwinian evolution, and this is where Bob and I had a language forbear, but it actually helped me a lot. You would have mutation, okay? You'd have mutation of genes within cells that, based on the environment that they were in, you would see branches come off, okay? So you would see a mutation at some point along this line here, and that mutation would lead off and it would thrive in the environment, so it would continue, rather than a mutation that would go into an environment that would be bad and it would just die off. Okay? All right. Now, in natural selection and in creation, what we would say is that a selection takes place within the genome of a creature, and based on its environment that it is in, it either continues that selection or drops it because it selects what it is based on the environment it is in. Now, here's where this is going to get interesting, and this is where we as creationists look different. So what we believe is not that there is a tree of life. This is actually something I just learned with this video, and it was actually very helpful for me, is that we don't believe in a tree of life, we believe in an orchard of life. We believe that God created and these are not cells like that. These are kinds, okay? So God creates a dog, God creates a cat, God, whatever, all the way down the line. And now based on natural selection, over time, we would expect new species to come forth from this kind based on natural selection of the environment that a creature is in. Okay. Again, I'm like losing my mind over time too. So I can do this. So based on this, you would have so many different species that can come off based of this because of the environment that they're in, the gene that God, we would say, that they were designed to have, but they would select based on environment, and you would see new species come to be because of this. Okay? Now, here's one of the reasons why, and Bob and I I'm going to explain this because, again, Bob has the biology. So mutation is a word that could also be used in regards to selection as well. But the reason why I'm choosing the word select is because it's selecting what is already there. Why do I do this? Okay, well, there are mutations that we've seen even in the human genome recently. So sickle cell anemia is a mutation of the human genome. Now, we know that there are problems with sickle cell anemia because of hemoglobin levels within the blood that cause a lot of problems. But sickle cell anemia is a mutation that actually developed because it helped people fight off malaria and other viruses. Why? Because this is, I know, I get that. I get that this is church, but this is like really cool, and I'm getting somewhere with this. Because we're created with a full set of DNA and information. And when you mutate information, what you end up doing is you have to see some kind of change within the genome. It would mutate in some possible way. So when it replicates with RNA, Bob, you don't need you to help me, but when it replicates with RNA, it might replicate improperly. So we had a mutation that became sickle cell anemia, okay? It benefited, yes, with malaria, but it also created a major problem. Why? Because mutations more often than not are actual problems for the human genome. Now, here's another thing we know about this, is that over time, there is very much a thing called genetic entropy. So what this means is that our human genome is actually getting worse over time. It's getting worse over time within our own bodies, and it's getting worse over time within us as a species, as a whole. So what does that mean? Well, you go, well, why are we living longer now than we did a little while ago? Well, advances in modern science and medicine have helped us to be able to fight off genetic entropy as best as we can, but the issue is we are actually getting worse. We're not actually evolving and getting better, we're actually getting worse over time because genetic entropy has proven that. Okay, so that's one part of this. I don't want to do too far. Okay, then you get other things like I'll just use the breed of Panthera. So like Panthera is a specific, not breed, Panthera is a specific genus that can mate together. So like lions, tigers, panthers, all of these creatures can actually mate together and create a species in and of itself that is different from the others. Does this make sense? That's why you have ligers. Thank you, Napoleon Dynamite. You get that reference, that's good. You put a Napoleon Dynamite joke when you're talking about creation evolution, it's going to cause a laugh. So we have all of these kinds of things taking place. So I did that, I covered that. Okay, so one of the other things with this, within the cell of your body, and now I'm going to get into some apologetic stuff again. Within the cell of your body, you have senders, you have receivers, you have the ability to transport, and you have language. Okay. Whatever, language. So you have all of these things taking place within your body, within every cell at all times. This is taking place because your cells are constantly replicating. in case you did not know that. You're constantly being reproduced within your own body at all times. So within your cell, you have senders and receivers, you have language, and you have transportation or communication networks within them. Here's the problem with when you line up all of these things, is that language in itself is not something that can be designed outside of a human mind or some kind of intelligent mind. If I were to take this marker, this carper will be replaced at some point. I'll take off both ends. If I were to take this marker, right, and throw it at the thing and just keep repeating it, right, I would get multiple dots on that whiteboard. Why? Because things can always be put into place, but the issue is without formation of those things, it wouldn't make sense. So in some kind of intelligent being has to be able to create language and write it out and make it understandable. So like for me, if you were to walk in here, you would not look at this and go, well, maybe you would. You wouldn't go, somebody just threw paint or somebody just threw markers at this board and now it looks like this. No, you would think somebody was here and somebody wrote this on this board. Why? Because our mind tells us in order for there to be information, there has to be somebody giving information. Okay. Yes. Okay, so then there are things that we have heard before which are slowly being showed in other problems. So at one point, scientists believed that there was only a 2% difference within our genetic structure between us and chimpanzees, apes. I don't remember the specific one. They believed that there was only a 2% difference. Now, over time, that percentage is actually increasing, that we're actually farther away than what they originally had thought. But even in that, in a 2% difference of our DNA structure, there is a 60 million letter difference in the human genome of just a 2% difference, which is massive. Massive issue. Okay. I'm going to skip that because that's just going to be way too much. Okay. So going back to the single cell concept. So in order for life to exist in itself, there have to be 350 enzymes present. And within those 350 enzymes, there has to be a specific sequence of amino acids within those enzymes in order to make that work as well. And if we were to take just the smallest, basic, most simple life form possible, there would have to be a sequence of 10 to be exact. So you got enzymes, amino acids within that, and you have to have a minimum of 10. And if you were to take all of these things together, if you had a primordial soup, which is one of the things that scientists are arguing for what life was created out of, a primordial soup, if you were to somehow have all of these things in existence within this primordial soup, you would have to nail a 50,000 digit pin at the exact right time in order for it to actually happen. It would just be a chance. So for me, this is what's funny, is that in creationism, right, they would argue towards us, and again, this is where I'm trying to help us understand both sides. They would argue to us, as like, well, you have a God of the gaps, like where you can't explain something, God just fills the gap for you. Yeah, but you have a Darwin of the gaps as well, because how in the world can you explain that possible chance happening? And in fact, this is literally not a joke. When I found this out, I was like, this is hilarious. There are some scientists who believe that chance is so small, by the way, that they say, well, obviously aliens had to have come at some point, and they were an intelligent being, and they brought intelligent life and brought it and created it in some capacity. We laugh, but this goes back to the original ethical question. And this is why this is so important, is that the reason why evolution is such a difficult topic is because the moment you give up evolution, it points to intelligent design. And if there is intelligent design, then there is a God. And if there is a God who is a creator, then he is worthy of our submission. So you don't want to give that up. So you have to point to something like aliens. All right. Some other things I discovered when studying this. I don't want to use, well, yeah, we'll use this one. So that one doesn't work. So I'm going to talk about this as well. So one of the things that they specifically talk about in that pointing to evolution is the fossil record. So Darwin himself, 150 years ago, said, in just a brief amount of time, the fossil record will prove over time that my theory is correct. Well, actually, the opposite has been true. The fossil record in showing things over time is that it's not actually been proven. It's not. And so here's some issues with the fossil record. And so some of you here, even right now, because there are Christians who believe this way, and I did not 2 years ago. Not 2 years ago. But as I'm reading more scientific things, I'm going, I don't know. I can't reconcile this anymore. So in the fossil record, what you'll find, I'll just use T-Rex as a specific example. I'll use dinosaurs as an example, okay? So in case you didn't know, in 2005, I'm going to write the date up here. In 2005, they found a fossil from a T-Rex that had soft tissue in it. AKA, they found a blood vessel, soft tissue, in the fossil of a T-Rex in 2005. Okay. Now this is astounding. Why? Because if dinosaurs are millions of years old, why would you find soft tissue in the fossil? Okay. Now here's what's even more astounding about this. What they did was they went back and they said, well, we have all these other fossils. We never checked for soft tissue before because we thought there was no possible way it would exist. Guess what? They found soft tissue in other fossils. Now, why do you not hear about this? Well, because you're not willing to give up your... I'm doing this because this is where I wrote evolution originally. You're not willing to give up what you believe based on science. So you don't say anything until you can prove it otherwise, right? You ever been in an argument, you just keep your mouth shut until you've gathered enough evidence and then you just throw it out there? It's kind of like that. And so the problem with this is that when they discovered soft tissue, you don't hear much about it, but yes, it is a fact. You can look it up. They found soft tissue in a T-Rex, and then they found fossils with other soft tissue as well. This is important because soft tissue wouldn't last millions of years. Now, they're trying to explain this away with this by saying, well, if there's a buildup of iron within the fossil or outside the fossil, well, then maybe it could encase the soft tissue enough that it would just endure and last. That's what they say. Why? Because they're not willing to head over to this side and say, you know what, maybe we're wrong. Well, here's another thing about fossils, by the way. The way that they date fossils is not actually usually based on the fossil themselves, but they do it based on where they find it in sedimentary rock. Okay? So they do it based on where they find it in the layering of the soil and the layering of the rock. Okay, so this is where it gets really crazy. So in the turn of the 19th century, there were two geologists named Lyell and Hutton. And Lyell and Hutton observed over time soil. And what they watched was, okay, you have a sediment. Well, I'll just make it easy. We'll say 1 inch of sediment is deposited and stays per year. Okay, I'm just making it easy. This is not actually what it is. So this is what they observed over time. They say, okay, well, 1 inch of sediment is deposited per year. So what then you could do is you could go back 120 inches, and that would be what? That would be 120 years, right? Is that math making sense to you so far? I made it as easy as possible. Okay. So this was called Uniformitarianism in geology. And for about 100 years, it was accepted, and it was the way that things were done. But then they had this problem. Well, I'll say this. Some geologists didn't actually want to subscribe to this, but it was just the way to do it. But then Mount St. Helens erupted. And when Mount St. Helens erupted, they saw, because of a catastrophe that took place, that over 8 feet of sediment was deposited in a day. And not just that, but they realized that valleys that significant valleys or crevices could be created in just a matter of a day. Why? Because uniformitarianism didn't account for any kind of catastrophe. Okay. I've got about 5 minutes. I'll lay this out for you. So, why is, again, The reason why I'm doing this is because this is an argument that is used in regards to evolution, which is why I'm talking about this. So you got rocks. Okay. I'm going to go back to this because you may or may not believe in this. We got to go to the flood. So flood, Noah's flood. If you read about Noah's flood, a lot of people read it and all they read is about rain. Okay? The problem is Noah's flood doesn't just talk about rain. Noah's flood talks about the water springing forth out from the earth. Large fountains, water flying out of the earth's crust. Okay, so when we read this now, this kind of like has some huge things. Why? Because if this were to happen, scientifically speaking, you would have, which we do have, we have major tectonic plates, which our continents sit on, which are constantly shifting. In case you didn't know this, they're constantly shifting. This is why, like, you have the San Andreas Fault where there are earthquakes. Why? Because when those tectonic plates rub the wrong way, you get an earthquake. Now, when we talk about the flood, specifically Noah's flood, what you're going to see is major tectonic shift taking place in a very brief period of time. Because in order for large amounts of water to spring forth from the earth, what you have to have happen is a large shuffling of what's taking place beneath the surface. So if this is taking place, you've got tons of tsunamis taking place all over the earth. You've got earth that is flying out, crevices developing. You have large bodies of water that are just flying through and causing deep crevices in places. Now here's another thing. Because of this, you also have large amounts of sediment. I don't know why I even drew something there. You have large amounts of sediment that is being deposited into new locations. And now what's amazing about this is when you get to our modern mountains, say, which by the way, the Appalachians would be the oldest mountain range on Earth, in case you didn't know that. They are dated and they're the oldest. Now they would date it millions and millions of years. We would just say they're the oldest based on what they see. But our more modern mountain ranges, the Alps, the Himalayas, I don't remember the other ones they listed. What you find in those mountains is really interesting because what you can see, and you can see them in multiple places, you can see curves within the rock. Actual curves within the sediment. Now here's the problem with this. If mountains were to grow over time quickly, you wouldn't see curves because have you ever tried to slowly bend a rock or quickly bend a rock? No, it breaks. Rocks are brittle, they break. But if you have a large amount of sediment that's deposited and hardens over time, you can get curves and then they would harden. So in flood ideology, what you would have and what we believe is that these large mountain ranges were actually are here because of Noah's flood. Now here's where it gets really interesting. And this is what I actually stopped. I made Julie listen to this and she said she was about ready to cry. I'm not going to erase this. Well, yeah, I'm not going to. So I'm just going to draw. I'm going to draw this. I'm going to draw this. Okay. So act like this is a tectonic plate here and act like this is a tectonic plate here. Okay. Now, again, what we see is these are moving and they go like under each other. And this is happening right now. It's just so small and so insignificant that you don't feel it. It's not recognizable, again, until you have that major shift and earthquakes happen and then tsunamis happen. But during the flood, because of all the catastrophe that's taking place, this would not be slow. This would be fast. This would be really fast. It would be very significant. Now, what's interesting about this is that seismologists in recent history, just the last few years, were taking samples towards near the Earth's core, and what they found was large collections of cold rock. The only way that you could get cold rock down closer to the Earth's core is that if it had moved quickly down in recent history, say a couple thousand years, and it hadn't fully heated up yet. There's no explanation without the flood. I mean, there really is none. There's no explanation without the flood for why we would have cold rock towards the core of the earth. Flood ideology actually lines up a lot for why we have what we have. But the issue is people don't recognize this. Another thing with dating, I'll use this and then I'll end. Yeah, I'm good here. So one of the other things they use to date is they'll use radiometric dating. I am going to erase this because this is huge, and this is where it becomes a major problem. So have you ever heard of carbon dating? Okay, so carbon dating, specifically using the molecule carbon-14, is one of the most trusted, because we know the half-life. We know what it is based on the structures of things, and so we can date things via carbon-14. But the issue with carbon-14 is it only lasts a certain period of time, just a couple tens of thousands of years at the most, and then it's gone. That's what carbon-14 does. But carbon-14 is actually found in everything. So what they use something called radiometric dating. Of course, now it's too wet. Maybe we'll do this. Perfect. So they use radiometric dating. So radiometric dating, we'll call this parent. Okay, you might not be able to see, but you'll understand. And we'll call this child. So radiometric dating is you would use specific molecules changing into other molecules over time based on breakdown. Okay? So I'll just say uranium breaking down into, this is not what it is, okay? We'll say uranium breaking down into plutonium. That's not what it is. And so what they would say is, okay, based on what we see of this breakdown, we would believe that it would be dated a certain way. But here's where this becomes a problem. There's a lot of assumptions that are made in radiometric dating. You are saying that up here, there's none of this. So basically what you're saying is there's not going to be any plutonium in the original structure. That's one of the assumptions of radiometric dating. But you don't know that. You can't make that assumption. Or you can, but because that's what they do. The other thing is you make the assumption that there is no massive change, but it's going to be consistent over time. Well, based on a lot of things I've shared with you already, based on catastrophes, if you introduce something else into the environment, it could change this, but they make that assumption. And then the other assumption is you don't, again, same thing for up here, you don't know what this was in the original. So radiometric dating is a lot of times what they use, but it's not as secure as others, as carbon-14. So why did I go into all this when I'm talking about evolution? Specifically the fossil record. So again, fossil record. Identity of soft tissue within fossils that are dated millions of years that they've tried to explain in other ways. But the easiest explanation, which by the way I always like to accept, is the fact that they're not millions of years old, they're only thousands of years old. Oh, and by the way, the Bible has dinosaurs in it, in case you didn't know that. If you read the book of Job, you have Leviathan, you have Behemoth, and if you read the descriptions of them, like literal dinosaurs and dragons at one point lived on this earth. In case you didn't know that. That is a thing. Okay, so fossil record, not as acceptable as it should be. But again, if you don't accept that, then it's harder to justify your evolution. Fossil record is an issue because of the geological record. Geological record is an issue because of catastrophes like Noah's flood. And because of all of these things, yes, could you make an argument? Well, obviously you can make an argument for evolution. It's there. It's being taught. But to say that there's no argument towards intelligent design, towards the biblical narrative, is just false. If you believe this, you're not stupid. You understand that? But what I also don't want you to do is just say the Bible said it, so I believe it. Because when you do that, sometimes you can look foolish. So today what I wanted to do is help you understand that there is a lot more to this than you think. And science is not just to be tossed to the wind, but instead it should be used in proper ways for things that are repeatable and testable, because over time we will find, because it's proven time and time again, that the Bible and science do actually line up, because our God is the creator, and over time we will discover that Jesus did what he said he would do. Thank you. Good night. No. So again, don't use this information to beat people over the head. That's not the purpose. If you're like, I want to know more, watch that video. I didn't understand half of it. I tried as best as I could to explain some of the concepts. Worship team, I had said come, but I'm not going to have you come because I think we're good. Here's the deal. Next week, we're back into the Word of God and preaching. I'm excited to be back into that. I hope you've enjoyed this series. I've grown a lot. I hope you've grown a lot. If you have questions based on anything I talked about today, again, I encourage you to do your own research as well, but also you can ask me, and I'm willing to follow up on that. And then again, if you have any questions moving forward, you can always fill out a question and drop it in, and I might pick yours next month. Would you stand as we close in prayer today? Whew. Jesus, I got through it, and I thank you for that. God, I pray that today we were encouraged. I pray that today we leave, God, built up in our mind to have a better understanding that we're not fools for believing what we believe, but instead that there is actual science that backs up what we do believe. Jesus, I pray that for those who we interact with, and maybe even ourselves, God, that we would have our hearts and their hearts softened to understand and believe that what was recorded in your word thousands of years ago is accurate. And that, Jesus, we can trust it and we can walk in its truth every day because it is life-changing. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. Amen. All right. Thank you guys so much. I'm listening. Yes, I was told last week. Hold on.